Hello friends, it's Dan. Welcome back. Welcome to another review, but this time not for a plastic miniature set. This is actually a new series that I'm starting of rulebook reviews. And I don't mean rule mechanic. There's plenty of I think better equipped channels out there that can go through rules mechanics, do some battle reports for you. There's there's lots of content out there if that's what you're looking for. I'm talking about a review of the physical rule books. I think that that's something that in this increasingly digital world that we're in a place where I think a lot of people are actually just turning to like PDF documents instead of the physical books. So as a result, I think rule books are becoming more and more of a considered purchase, and I thought it would be useful information to have to actually start looking at rule like print quality, book construction, layout, like formatting, those kinds of questions that you might want answered before you make a decision about whether or not to pick a book up for yourself. And I actually have a couple of rule books now incoming. We've partnered up with Osprey Publishing, so they're sending us their second edition of Dragons Rampant, so we'll be looking at that here shortly, as well as a couple of books from Firelock Games, their Blood and Plunder range and their Port Royal rule sets. So this is going to be kind of not a new direction for the channel, but a parallel direction for the channel. We'll be doing these alongside our plastic miniature reviews. So as a result, I wanted to trial out the format. I'm actually doing this review because I need your feedback. I have a rough idea of how I want to do it, but I thought that I would go through and do a kind of abbreviated review of this book that I've already got, which is the 6th edition Warhammer rulebook. Not because I thought anybody is eager to learn about the construction quality of this particular book, but because I thought it would be a good kind of test subject for me to go through and trial this format out that I have in mind for these other rule books that, as I just mentioned, I've got in transit. So from here on out, the rest of the format's going to be what future rulebook reviews will be like. So I really appreciate it, though, if you guys would provide any notes, feedback, even if that feedback is just you're on the right track, Dan, keep doing what you're doing, or if you've got any insights on how I can improve these going forward. You guys have been immensely helpful with my miniature reviews, so I have no doubt that you'll have lots to say about these rulebook reviews as well. So the only other thing I wanted to note is that the pacing of this is going to be a little bit faster than I think what will happen with a normal rulebook review. This is probably going to be like a 15-minute video all in. I think that mostly it'll come down to like the page turning will probably be like 50% faster than I would do with a rule book that people are actually eager to get information on. So for this trial one, it's going to be again the same kind of flow, but maybe just a little bit sped up. So I'm switching to a voiceover format actually for this part of the video because I tend to, if I'm like talking while I'm flipping the book, I tend to slow down or speed up. So this is just to keep myself consistent as I'm going through here. So this version of the book that I have is the second printing, which was produced in 2000. And it's soft cover. You can see this is the full size book. I don't think they made a small one when this came out. This book actually came in the starter set. The plastic starter set for 6th edition, which was really cool. I wish that they had had a hardback version of this. At least I never encountered one. They might have made like a special edition hardback. And then subsequent editions of Warhammer were hardback as well. But that was always nice. Like I'd gladly pay a premium for a hardback, not just because it's fancier, but because as a wargaming supplement, it's handy to have because it's going to get banged up on the table and whatnot. But otherwise, it's 288 pages, which is robust for any rule book. And I think the layout of it is very nice. You can see we have a kind of expansive table of contents here at the beginning. But the way that they've broken this down is they've got this really wonderful intro section that kind of introduces you to the Warhammer hobby in general, kind of an overhead view of what it is we're doing here, which I think is missed on a lot of even like current Warhammer books, but rule books generally. It sort of assumes that you already know enough about the hobby to go on. So this is a nice section. It's got a little bit on painting, a little bit on general hobby notes. Again, just sort of setting the scene for the rest of the book. And then the layout, otherwise, the sections of the book are broken up as the general rules, which are kind of like the basic rules to give you an idea of movement, how units are going to interact with one another, and again, just kind of generally what we're doing. There's then a separate section on advanced rules, which gives you breakdowns on things like characters, war machines, unit special rules, things of that nature. And then there's a whole separate section on magic, and then Warhammer lore, and then appendices at the end. And we'll get to those in a second, but I think that layout is very intelligent because it allows you as a player to, one, get an intro to the hobby, then you have the basic rules of just how to start a game and move around. And then, maybe after you've played a couple of games, you can start layering in some of the more advanced rules. I really like that flow. And then these books, too, did such a good job from a layout standpoint. You can see they're a nice mix of, obviously, the relevant text that we're going through here, but really lovely images. It's a mixture of, sometimes there's some photos, sometimes there's these illustrations within them, and then all these diagrams that I think really provided a template for future rule books that came out. I think use a lot of the same like hand-drawn overhead shot diagrams that give a really clear idea of what it is that's being described here. Now, as to whether or not all like the rule writing was the tightest, that's generally a criticism of Games Workshop, especially in this era where it was more flavor or fun oriented. Basically like assuming that you would use common sense in interpreting some of these rules. So there are some like weird things about it that required FAQs down the road. But again, from a layout standpoint, I think the flow is very nice. I think it's all incredibly intuitive and visually appealing, again, because you can see every single page has some kind of illustration on it, be it a painting of some kind or a photograph of miniatures, and then a good mix of artists as well too. That might be my only other criticism, is that the artists aren't credited on the page itself. There's a credits section at the very front where it has all the publishing information on the book, but there's, other than like knowing an artist's work or particular style, there's really no way for you to know who did what. But you can see there's very few pages where it's just a wall of text. I guess these are some examples here where they're a little text heavy, but this is because we're getting into the more advanced rules section of the book here. But again, the flow makes perfect sense to me. And you saw at the beginning, actually, there was a few pages that were in color. There's a section at the end as well that is full color, that is pictures of the various armies, which is another lovely section. But in addition, kind of offsetting those walls of text, you can see there are a few pages too that are just full page illustrations, mostly in black and white, but again, a good mix of artists and a good mix of subject matter in terms of what is being depicted here. I think too, we're about to move into, it was smart of them, I think, to separate out the magic section from the advanced rules, because magic is one of the more complicated phases within Warhammer, and it, like the advanced rules being kind of a layer on top of the basic rules, having magic then be kind of a layer on top of the advanced rules as a sort of optional thing for players to add in once they're ready. Maybe after they've had a handful of games, was another smart choice. You can see here we're now moving into the magic section. This is another reason why with these rule reviews I'm not super interested in like drilling down into the mechanics. Again, there are other channels that already do that, but I personally feel that I don't think anybody has a real handle on a rule set until they've played probably like 20 games. So this is a great example there too, where like if you've never played Warhammer before, you should play a few games just with the basic rules, a few games with the advanced rules, and only then start layering in the magic rules. So I certainly, when I'm being introduced to a brand new rule set, don't feel that I'm in a position to opine on the mechanics of a rule until I've had a couple dozen games under my belt. So here we're now moving into the lore section of the rule book. I mentioned this is 288 pages, and solidly half of it is this kind of content, like lore content, optional rules for things like sieges, Warhammer skirmish. We're going to get to that at the end here. But you can see even the print quality of the pages here is slightly different. It's got a kind of more muddled gray background to it that makes it almost look like parchment paper, just in black and white. But this has some lovely, as to whether or not like the writing itself is top tier. It's fine, like for what it is. It's trying to present basic information on the Warhammer world that you'll be playing in. And then this is probably my favorite section of the entire book, which is a page by page section on full color, by the way, on the various Warhammer armies that existed at the time. So there were no Ogre Kingdoms at this point, I think, but everybody else is listed. I think Vampire Counts and Khemri, or the Tomb Kings, were still one faction. You can see it's kind of broken out on one page, but it was one like undead book at the time. And then a few of them only had one page to themselves, and then a couple of them had two-page spreads, like your bigger armies, like your Empire, etc. So this is another great section. The print quality is fantastic, considering that this is a 25-year-old book. And then here we're moving into the kind of appendices at the back. You can see this first one here is scenario options for you. So instead of just playing a pitched battle, they give you a bunch of different ideas for games that aren't necessarily intrinsically balanced in terms of points, just to spice things up a little bit. Again, we talk about layers, like layering advanced rules, layering magic rules, and then once you know what you're doing, here's some fun scenarios that you can trial out. Again, pay attention to the illustrations throughout this book. I don't think there's a single page, other than maybe a few in the appendices, that are lacking an illustration of some kind, just to keep your interest. There's also this section here on the battlefield, like at the beginning, how there was a whole section on sort of introducing you to the Warhammer hobby. The battlefield section not only gives you some tables that you can roll on, depending on what you can see here, realms of men, etc., some tables to roll on to give you different types of terrain for your games, but it actually has a little brief section there on how to build up some of your own terrain for your battlefields, which is something that otherwise you would really only see in like White Dwarf articles of the time, and now Games Workshop has completely moved away from. They don't want you making your own terrain, they want you buying it. And then now we're in the appendices section, which is a big section of the book as well. This is probably the only part that feels a little disjointed to me, whereas the rest of it flowed so wonderfully. This almost feels like, this is great information. It's got rules on like siege rules, Warhammer Skirmish, you can see we're working through. It's almost like a whole separate rule book here. But this feels more like they had just a ton of extra information that they needed to throw in, and they weren't quite sure where to put it. That's why they seem to be named, the appendices 1 through, I think, 8 is what they go up to. So this feels like it could have been laid out a little bit differently, almost like Warhammer Skirmish, frankly, should have kind of been its own book, but if you were going to include it, you include it as like a separate section, because it kind of hops back and forth between supplemental rules and some like designer thoughts or almost FAQ kind of questions. You can see like rules commentary there is sort of thoughts on the advanced rules. If you come into like weird charging situations, what do you do? So it seems that these appendices are trying to do a lot of different things, but what it also does here at the very end, which is lovely, is it gives you a snapshot of all the special rules that are listed within the book, including all the charts that you might need to reference. You can see there that's a hit and to wound charts, which is a great addition as a gaming aid or supplement, because it's fast references there at the end, as well as you can see some templates. There's also going to be a section here where to photocopy, that is, and print out. Here's a section on all the stat lines that existed in the game at the time, and there's also a section on army list building. You could photocopy these for yourself to then write in your army. So it's a wonderful book. I think it really, for me, this was the first rule book I ever owned, and I think that it provided a really solid template or foundation for rule books to come. I think the only thing it's really missing is an index, by which I mean, like, if the rule Killing Blow comes up in a game, you want to be able to go to an index to find what page is Killing Blow listed on. Of course, there is kind of a section at the end that gives a snapshot of different rules, but there's no full index listed anywhere in the book. So, and there you have it. Again, this is, I know, kind of an unusual one because this is an old book, but regardless, give me your thoughts below. I appreciate you dropping by for this one in the meantime, and until next time, happy game.